The auctions are over for the Nolkabar and Wallambai churches, but the bitterness remains.
There will be no normality in Cessnock. Cessnock is a very much divided parish and will never, in my lifetime, be reunited.
3 weeks ago, the historic churches were put to sale after the diocese decided flagging congregations couldn't justify the expense to keep them going. But in a bold move to block the proposal, 2 local businessmen bought St Patrick's and St Michael's, reportedly giving the communities back their places of worship. But a letter from the bishop to the parish says the buildings are no longer recognised as sacred, and goes on to state that for priests and people to proceed to worship without permission is contrary to church law and carries its own penalties, a threat locals aren't taking too kindly.
If he's saying that we're to be excommunicated for our actions, I would like someone to tell me.
The Bishop of Maitland, the Most Reverend Leo Clark, is on holidays and was unavailable for comment. Father Ryan, the parish priest here in Cessnock, is also away. NBN contacted the Catholic Church in Sydney, but a spokesperson said he could not comment, as this is an issue outside his diocese. Local parishioners say they've been frustrated by a lack of communication with the church hierarchy. The only chance they have now is to speak directly with the Vatican.
This is merely the tip of the iceberg, and I say to those people in other parishes within the diocese, it will happen to you. Please pray for us.
Peter Ryan, NBN News. Kersley Public was opened in 1916, but it was the Depression years when these students were learning the 3 R's. 60 returned to their old school today to look over books, meet long-lost friends and see how the students cope in 1991. And this year's crop were all smiles for their visitors. It seems the former students couldn't have disliked their school years too much. 3 went on to become headmasters themselves.
This is Port Pirie, a country town situated at the foot of the Flinders Range, about 220 kilometres north of Adelaide. With a population of 14,000, the town's primary survival is from the Pasminco lead smelter, owned by Broken Hill Associated Smelters. It is the largest lead smelter in the world, but it is also the source of severe lead contamination in the town.
It was serious in that 1 in 4 children had an elevated blood lead level, and it was estimated that some 40% of the Port Pirie community could have had an elevated blood lead level.
4 months ago, a similar problem was identified in Lake Macquarie. The company concerned, the smaller sister smelter of BHAS Pasminco sulfides. 14 children from the area have so far been found to have levels of lead in their blood above standards accepted by the Australian Medical Health and Research Council. The lead problem in Bullaroo is not as serious nor as widespread as in Port Pirie, but the procedure being used to remedy it here can be used in Bullaroo, and that's why the resident group is here. The lead implementation program in Pirie has its base in the centre of the town at the government-established Environmental Health Centre. The program has been underway for 7 years and is showing results.
At the moment we've got approximately 1 in 10 children with an elevated blood lead level.
So are you pleased with those results?
Extremely, because some of our levels were very high, and so we've actually achieved a 20% reduction.
But it's taken millions of dollars and almost a decade to get this far. The question the resident group from Bullaroo wants answered is why, when the problem was identified in South Australia years ago, weren't they told about the risk before now?
Well, there was a survey in Bullaroo, I said earlier, in 73, 74, where the results were good. The Health Commission didn't see any cause for alarm. The smelter at Bullaroo makes much less lead, and we didn't anticipate that we would find these levels.
But what astounded the resident group about Port Pirie was that the majority of local residents accept the workings of the smelter and the lead problem is created. While we were filming, this malfunction occurred at the plant. The emission is a mixture of coke gas and lead. But not one resident complained. When we approached the company, they were highly defensive and embarrassed. The government monitoring body has been informed of the situation and is looking into it. But when a community believes their livelihood is at stake, very little will be done. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
The Forjax floating dock will sit high and dry for the next month. For the first time in the 4 years the company's held the dock's lease, there isn't a ship booked in for slipping. The Royal Australian Navy ship to Brook was a gift horse for Newcastle, but a breached no-strike agreement in its refit contract turned it into a stone around the yard's neck. The work was eventually completed to the Navy's satisfaction, but the exercise all but broke the Painters and Dockers Union and cost Forjax its hard-won reputation.
In terms of reputation, it did do us a lot of harm because we had been through 4 years without a stoppage, without any strike at all, and people were beginning to say that Forjax was a company in which you could put absolute reliability in terms of delivery times, and that's essential to a ship owner in that it costs him about $30,000 a day to be out of service.
50 foreign shipping companies enjoy profitable trade in Australian waters, but they all take their maintenance and repair work offshore to places such as Singapore. In an attempt to win such work, Forjax is using the downtime to maintain and refit the dock, but it's also negotiating for a single union enterprise agreement. Under this plan, the Painters and Dockers would be absorbed into the Metalworkers Union, reducing demarcation and streamlining industrial relations. A similar package is considered a prerequisite for the reopening of Carrington slipways by the Australian Submarine Corporation.
With this one union agreement which is now coming in place, which is absolutely essential to the viability of this yard and to the viability of ship repair in Australia.
Conferences like this aren't uncommon in the medical profession. Used to convey the latest research information, they're forums to test ideas.
It is one of the great traditions of medical research that people in a very friendly way are highly critical of each other, so that if there's any possible error that's crept in, it will be brought to light.
Brought to light at this year's conference, subjects ranging from nutritional studies to the treatment of bacterial meningitis. Among the speakers, international expert on metabolic disorders, Professor Dame June Lloyd, urging the importance of the study of rare diseases and the importance of teaching hospitals like the John Hunter.
A lot of research can go on in the community, in general practice, but a lot of research must go on in a centre. And that's why in my country, your country, all over the world, we do need to have centres. We mustn't let them wither away.
NBN broke the news that all was not well between McLean and the Knights last week. It was later dismissed in the press as pure media speculation, but today it was back on the front page of the local paper. Unlike former players Dave Woods and Steve Linnane, the Queenslander is on much more than a handshake deal. He's legally contracted to play with the Knights next season, and at this stage has given every indication he's keen to do so. Brisbane solicitor Bill Blake today admitted he has been called in to act on McLean's behalf, but refused to comment on the situation between his client and the club. Newcastle Chief Executive Mike Armstrong would only say that McLean is under contract to the Knights for 2 years. In fact, ask Mr Armstrong anything about McLean and that's the only response you'll get. For the moment, the International Sports Centre is surrounded by a wall of silence. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
When the Burwood Beach treatment plant is commissioned next year, Newcastle's sewage will be converted into 3,000 tonnes of sludge each day. The Hunter Water Board's controversial plans to dump some of the sludge in disused mines under Merewether is about 9 months away from reality. But a visiting academic from Pennsylvania State University, Dr. Herschel Elliott, says dumping sludge in mines could amount to throwing away a valuable resource.
Well, you're not getting the benefit of the nutrients, which tends to be one of the driving forces for land application of sludge in the United States.
Dr. Elliott is an agricultural engineering professor and has helped to develop the use of sludge as a fertiliser. At today's sludge management seminar, Dr. Elliott spoke about the Americans' use of the waste product to put life back into farmland, something he believes could be applied to the Hunter's agricultural areas.
I realize that many of the soils here could benefit from the additional fertility from the organic matter, and even in a season like this, perhaps the water value of the sludge as well. So I think that potential exists.
Kathy Cole, a Hunter Water Board engineer involved in the Burwood Beach sludge disposal strategy, questions how appropriate the farmland proposal would be for the Hunter.
The problem is developing a demand for that resource, and certainly the costs of processing the material, transporting it, monitoring it at receiving sites can be massive and far greater than the actual value of the product.
The Quicksilver Surf League is a unique contest. Unknown club surfers compete alongside the legends of the sport, men like Queensland's Rabbit Bartholomew, world champion in 1978.
Clubs are the backbone of Australian surfing, and really that's the bottom line. That's where all our world champions came from. That's where they'll come from in the future.
This kind of thing doesn't happen in other countries around the world, does it?
That's why they're not number one.
This year, the venue for the final was Wollongong's Woonona Beach. Clubs from around the country travelled to the south coast only to be confronted by minuscule conditions. Luck played a huge part in every heat. Merewether's Marcus Brabant didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he wiggled towards the sand on several ankle-snapping waves. He was fortunate to take second place. Clubmate Shane Powell had the luck and ability to dominate his heat, as did Simon Law. Matt Hoy was in great form but couldn't match the longer waves of Central Coaster Adam Leslie and had to be content with second. As day one ended, the reigning champs were on the ropes.
It's going to be pretty hard because it's not really the talent, it's whoever catches the waves, and let's just pray for something tomorrow, or it's just going to be more luck than experience.
Conditions did improve marginally overnight, and with a little room to move, some of the country's best pushed the limits of modern surfing. Luke Egan found just enough power to win his heat by the narrowest of margins. Nick Wood did likewise, and Merewether were into the tag team semi-finals. They faced an informed Cronulla, but another white-hot performance by Powell gave the defending champs an early lead. Cronulla stormed back into contention and the lead seesawed throughout the heat. A pressure display by Luke Egan gave Merewether back some momentum, and Simon Law, the best anchorman since Ray Deneen, held off Cronulla's Jake Spooner to put the club in its fifth straight grand final. They met Manly club Queenscliff, who only qualified for the final thanks to some basic errors by North Narrabeen and this frantic dash up the beach by anchorman Ryan Allagich. Completing its wave quota 7 seconds within the allotted hour gave Queenscliff the 2 bonus points that made all the difference. The All-Star Merewether team went into the final as favourites, but Queenscliff had some big guns to call on as well. Former world champ Barton Lynch was in devastating form, and world number 5 Rob Bain was thriving in the team environment.
I think it's harder, because when you lose, you only got yourself to blame, and you sort of go, oh, well, I can cope with that, you get used to it. But when you got a whole bunch of the guys on the beach and they're all behind you, and it comes down to, well, I pretty much had to win that heat to keep our chances alive.
Once again, a blitzing Powell gave Merewether a good early lead, but then things began to go horribly wrong. As Bain racked up the points, Nick Wood fell on 3 crucial waves, putting the pressure squarely on the broad shoulders of Luke Egan. Unfortunately, an incoming tide had reduced the surf to an inconsistent mess, and as master tactician Lynch powered through the shore break, Big Luke was left stranded out the back. As time ticked away, so too did Merewether's chances. Merrick Davis increased the Queenscliff lead, and Simon Law was left high and dry on the beach as Matt Hoy waited for a miraculous comeback wave. The result was a foregone conclusion, and the Sydney-siders were rubbing it in. While Queenscliff savoured the spoils of victory, the Merewether crew were already thinking about 92. Bruce Mackenzie for Sports Centre Sunday. The hunters' timber industry appears to be adopting a wait-and-see approach to the legislation. Several sawmills today admitted that, if ruthlessly enforced, the ruling could almost wipe out forestry in the area and put hundreds of jobs in jeopardy. New South Wales Forest Products Association figures show 1,125 people employed by the industry in the hunter and estimate annual earnings to be in excess of $90 million.
The Wallsend Advisory Task Force is meeting tonight for the first time. The group, which contains local government and union representatives, medical staff and Wallsend citizens, will examine a series of options for the complex, including an aged care service, public health unit or student accommodation. Meanwhile, the picket line remains at Wallsend. The protesters say they'll stay until the hospital is reopened.
Time and change ebb slowly around Swansea Flats, home base to lake fishermen for generations. An 11-year project is nearing completion and has undergone inspection by members of the Newcastle District Fishing Co-op. $400,000 of the co-op's money has gone into the new depot. Catches will be docked at the back door, cleaned and sold fresh over the front counter or trucked to Newcastle and Sydney. The building has its own cold rooms and ice-making plant, a far cry from earlier Hessian bags and packing crates. The fish offered for sale will be so fresh that some could still be swimming.
The public can come and pick a fish out of the tank and say, well, I'll have that fish and take him home and eat him.
26 professional fishermen haul $1 million of fish and prawns from the lake's delicate ecosystem each year. But according to them, the resource has never been so plentiful or so well managed.
The fishing stocks in Lake Macquarie, and this is probably not what the general public really thinks or believes, but it's increased over the last 20 years by about 300%. The full-time professional fisherman at heart is definitely an environmentalist. He's going to protect his industry, he's going to protect what's in that water for his kiddies and his grandkiddies to follow on in his tradition.
The world is awash with computer technology, most of it heading toward universal usability. Clarity and compatibility are two of the main selling points for both industrial and domestic applications, and the price difference is narrowing.
Well, the Expo this year, I think, is proving to people that you don't have to have $50,000, $60,000 to get yourself into a good computer package for home.
Word commands are being replaced by icons, keyboards by touch-sensitive screens. Head-up displays can project the personal computer screen to a packed house, while high-definition graphics and video inputs put magazine-style layouts in the hands of home publishers. Automotive and aircraft design principles seem like child's play.
And I think they want to get past the stage of just playing games and do something more creative.
And those sort of tools are what's available here?
Yeah, the things that are on display at this show relate to business as well as home, but I think the graphics packages are the things that are the most impressive in my mind at this show.
As Newcastle's government buses stood idle, 3 private Hunter contractors picked up the slack and the passengers. But the sight of buses other than the uniform blue and white vehicles servicing state transit stops were causing confusion. Blue Ribbon, Sugar Valley and the Toronto bus services stepped in for the first time 2 months ago during a state transit strike. The private contractors negotiated with Transport Minister Bruce Baird to supply the service again during this latest stoppage on the first day of the school holidays.
There was an expectation after the services that we provided last time that we would work in with the Department of Transport to provide these services.
Not so appreciative of the private bus operators is the Government Drivers' Union.
The peace and tranquility of the hills of Paterson have been shattered by the delighted screams of the kids from Camp Quality. And these are the sedate ones. Somewhere down the road, their friends are canoeing. Others are learning the joys of abseiling. Sometime this week, they'll find time to make Christmas decorations, go bowling and learn pottery. For 7 years, Camp Quality has been giving young cancer sufferers a chance to forget they're sick and simply enjoy being young and active.
Most of the time they like to put this behind them and get on with having a good time.
For many, the camp is the highlight of the year.
This is my 7th camp.
Wow, you must really like it. What's so good about it?
I think riding the horses and going on the outings.
The Minister was on the receiving end of some barbed questions from angry prawn fishermen. The government introduced the East Coast Trawl Management Plan last April. It's aimed at reducing the catch and preserving the prawn industry. While the fishermen agree they want a viable long-term industry, they say this new plan is discriminatory.
There's been no consultation. The ECMAC plan doesn't suit a majority of fishermen. It's unfair, it's unjust, and we want it changed.
The fishermen offered the Minister an alternate plan which he has agreed to consider.
Overall, I'm looking for equity amongst the fishermen and also, as I said, which is most important, some reduction in that effort, otherwise we won't have a fishery.
This was the first of 3 meetings the Minister will have with prawn fishermen on the New South Wales East Coast. Later this month he will visit Ballina and Maclean. Jane Anderson, NBN News.